Happy Monday. We are going to pick up our story of Sarai and Abram. As you know, we left them in Egypt. Well, actually, Egypt said bye-bye. And so they are now headed to the land of Canaan. And they and Lot and all of their possessions. Now, when they got somewhere within the desert and close to Canaan, that's when Abram said to Lot, we need to split up. There's too many of us. So Lot went one way and Abram the other. After Abram had been in Canaan for about 10 years, so now he would have been about 85, Sarai comes to him and says, you know, what are we going to do? You know, God told you that he was going to make you the father of many nations, but I still don't have a child. So why don't we take my maidservant and you sleep with her, and then if she gets pregnant, then at least it'll be your son, and maybe the promise is supposed to come that way. Now, if you recall in the last story, when they were in Egypt, when Sarai and Abram decided to take matters into their own thinking, their own hands, they got themselves into a lot of trouble. They caused a lot of trouble for Pharaoh because they didn't fully trust God. And once again, they're trying to do their own thinking about how, you know, Abram is going to be the father of many nations as God had promised. Instead of being patient and waiting, they just decided to take matters into their own hands again. And, you know, you can say Sarai caused all of this, but really it was the two of them, because Abram agreed and he slept with Hagar. Hagar was the name of Sarai's maidservant. So he sleeps with her, and sure enough, she gets pregnant. And when she does, before she does, I should say, when she gets pregnant with this child, then she starts to not like Sarai, because, you know, when you've had an intimate relationship with someone, you build feelings for them, okay? It wasn't just a matter of, here, go have sex with this man. I mean, intimacy creates a relationship amongst two people that is stronger than, in most cases. And in this case, Hagar started to have feelings for Abram. When she had feelings for Abram, she then, of course, despised her mistress because she wanted Sarai out of the picture. And she probably felt like she was much better than Sarai because, look, she got pregnant. And again, remember, back in those days, having children was something that made you worthy. It made you, you know, especially if you had sons, and even the women and all the men, they would just praise you if you were going to have children. And so Hagar's thinking, look, I could have a child. And she started to have feelings for him. So she was not feeling it with her mistress, Sarai. When that happens, Sarai goes to Abram and says, now what are we going to do? Because you went and did this with Hagar, and now she doesn't like me, and you need to fix it. And Abram's like, well, you're the one that brought her to me in the first place. And, you know, and even though we agreed, you know, she's your problem. She's your maidservant. Do whatever you want to do. So he wasn't, you know, even though he did the deed, he wasn't going to have any part of it. No responsibility for what happened and why she's behaving the way she is. So he basically washed his hands of her. So when Abram tells Sarai, do whatever you want, well, then Sarai decides she doesn't like her anymore and starts abusing her. Now, the Bible doesn't go into details about what she did exactly, but whatever it is she did, Hagar was not getting any empathy or sympathy from Abram. So the abuse, and it calls it abuse, whatever, you know, Sarai was doing to Hagar, it was bad enough that Hagar felt like she had to leave. So she leaves. and goes out into the wilderness. She just packs up some stuff and pregnant and leaves. Out there in the middle of nowhere. And of course she starts to cry and, feeling sorry for herself because it's like, well, now what am I supposed to do? She doesn't know how to get back to Egypt. She doesn't have anybody to help her. Her mistress kicked her out. Well, actually she ran out because she was tired of being abused. And once again, God stepped in. When we try to mess up things, sometimes, as we talked about last time, sometimes God bails us out. Sometimes he lets us go through some things to teach us a lesson. But regardless of whatever the outcome is, God is always there. In this case, because this is back in the days when God actually directly spoke to people when he chose to, he sent his angel or his messenger to Sarai, and she, out of nowhere, an angel appears. You can just imagine how Hagar must have felt about that. So here's Hagar out there. She's feeling miserable and not knowing what to do. And this angel comes to her and says, you need to go back and submit to her. Just do what she tells you to do. I'm going to watch over you, and you are going to have a child. You're going to have a son, and you're going to name him Ishmael. And the Ishmael means the Lord hears me, or the Lord sees me. And so she said, okay. She believed him, because if you're out in the middle of nowhere and an angel appears to you, that's a pretty good proof that God is intervening. So you can just imagine if you're being abused by someone and now you're being told to go back into that situation. You can just imagine what Hagar must have been feeling. But her trust in what God was saying to her was stronger than her fear of Sarai. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So Hagar basically goes back to the camp, and it doesn't ever say how Sarai treated Hagar after that. But what we do know is that she did have the son, and Abraham named him Ishmael, because that is the name that means God sees me or God hears me. And he was, and then time goes by. So 13 years go by when, or 10 years or so goes by when Abraham hears from God again. And God says to him, I'm going to make you the father of many nations. It's time for me to keep my covenant with you. And so Sarai is going to have a son, and you're going to name us, well, we're going to get to that in a minute. So he says to Abram, it's time for me to keep my covenant with you, so you are going to have a child this time next year. Now, Abram laughs about that. He says, but I'm 100 years old. Am I going to have a child at 100 years old? And then God basically says to him, I'm showing you through these sacrifices, walking through the animals and whatnot, I'm showing you that I keep my promises. I meant what I said, and now it's time to fulfill that. And this time next year, you will have a child with Sarai. So, I don't know if he didn't tell Sarai or what, but what he did, I don't know if Abram told Sarai or not. Part of me feels like he did not say anything to her because of what happens next. But before we get to that, when God came this time and said to Abram, it's time for us to fulfill this covenant, he also changed his name. He changed his name to Abraham, which means exalted father. And because he's going to be the father of many, many nations. He even names them, which in chapter 16 of Genesis, 15 of Genesis, at the end of the chapter, he says, you're going to have all this land, all of this country, and you're going to be the father of many, many nations, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Raphites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. So that's a lot of people that live in this land, and this land was very fertile. And this land of Canaan comes up again way down in history. But for right now, God says, this is where you're going to be, in this fertile land with all of your people. And I'm going to, from you, many, many nations, many, many people are going to come. So, Abraham, now he's called Abraham. And he also says to him, and Sarai is going to be having a child. And so now, instead of calling her Sarai, you're going to call her Sarah, because she's going to be the mother of many nations, and kings will come from her. So now, from this part of the story forward, it's now Abraham and Sarah, which we more familiarly know them by, which is why I have so much trouble when I'm trying to speak their name. So anyway, many years go by, 13 years go by, and we're going to talk about that at the end here in just a second. But 13 years go by, Hagar has Ishmael, God blesses Ishmael. He had promised Hagar that he would make sure that he had many, many descendants as well, and that, he would be well taken care of, and she would be well taken care of. So, Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar had Ishmael. But 13 years go by, and when we pick up the story next time, we'll find out what happens, okay? But what I want to touch on here right at the end of the video for us to meditate on is the fact that two things. One is, again, when we insert our own thinking into matters that God has presented before us, and we try to think it out in our human ways, then we're not really trusting what God says. And I know that a lot of us in this day and age do the same thing. We read our Bible, we read the words, but we believe there's a God, and we believe the things that are said there, but we don't believe fully that necessarily that what he says is going to happen. And that's what happened with Abraham and Sarah. They're up in age, past childbearing. How could this happen? And, but Abraham believed him, once again, he believed him. And once again, God was there to, prove to him that he meant what he said. So that's number one. The other thing that I want to talk about just briefly is the fact that God has his own timetable. If you notice, from the first time that God mentions that he's going to have this covenant with him, Abraham was 75 years old. Now Abraham is 86 years old. So many years have gone by, 11 years have gone by when he makes the second promise to him. Another 13 years will go by after that before Isaac is actually born, because Abraham was 100 and Sarah will be 99 when this all takes place, 90 when this all takes place. So God works in his own timetable. And as humans, that's hard for us at times to be patient. And especially in the day and age that we live in, when everything is just instant social media, instant news, instant food, instant things you can dispose of. We have a really hard time waiting on God. And this is where Abraham and Sarah had trouble as well. But you can imagine if somebody makes a promise to you and years go by. 13 years is a long time in human terms. For God, a day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years a day. So for God's timetable, it's nothing. He lives in eternity. So we don't think like he does. But 20-something years, more than 20-something years goes by, and then God says, okay, it's time. Now it's time for me to fulfill this promise I made to you. Now, obviously, Abraham is still living, Sarah's still living, Ishmael happened, they named him what he said. Things are happening exactly the way God said they would. So their full trust should be in him. But it is very hard for humans to wait. And it is a very big lesson for all of us to understand that when God says something to us, be patient. Right now, we all wait for the Lord to return. He says Jesus is coming back, and we patiently wait for that. So when you meditate on these things today, I want you to think about those two things. One, do you have your life fully entrusted to Him? And number two, how are you doing with patience? Because it is hard, I understand. When we pick up our story next time, we're going to find out what happens when some visitors come to Abraham and Sarah. And I hope you have a great week ahead. Peace and love. Bye-bye.